The applause didn't stop. It rolled through the club like a wave, crashing against the walls, filling every corner until it felt like the whole building was vibrating with it. She stood there, just off the stage, her back pressed against the wall as if she could disappear into it. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear, not anymore, but from something else, something she didn't have a name for. A man in a sharp suit pushed through the crowd, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor. He wasn't like the others in the club. His tie was too straight, his posture too perfect, like he had spent his whole life learning how to take up space. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive. Something that didn't belong in a place like this. "That was incredible," he said, his voice smooth, like he had practiced the words 100 times before. "I've never heard anyone play like that." She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the floor, on the scuffed toes of her own shoes. "Thanks," she muttered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. It was thick, heavy, the kind of card that didn't bend easily. He held it out to her. "My name's Thompson. I work with artists. I'd like to talk to you about recording." She didn't take the card. Not right away. She just stared at it like it might burn her if she touched it. "Recording?" she repeated. He nodded. "You've got real talent. The kind that doesn't come around often. I'd hate to see it wasted in a place like this." She finally looked up at him. His face was serious, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. She had seen that look before, on men who came into the club thinking they could buy anything they wanted. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Recording," he smiled just a little. "It means you play, we record it, and people all over the country hear you. It means you don't have to wipe tables anymore." She glanced over at the bar where Chuck was watching them, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had been the one to push her onto that stage, to make that stupid joke that had changed everything. Now he looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Thompson followed her gaze. "You know him?" "He's the manager." Thompson's smile didn't waver. Then he knows a good thing when he hears it. She reached out and took the card. It was warmer than she expected, like it had been sitting in his pocket for a while. She turned it over in her fingers, tracing the raised letters with her thumb. "Think about it," Thompson said. "Call me tomorrow." She didn't say anything. He didn't wait for her to. He just nodded, gave her one last look, and then turned and walked out of the club, the crowd parting for him like he was someone important. The moment the door closed behind him, the noise of the club rushed back in, laughter, glasses clinking, the hum of conversations. She looked down at the card again. It felt heavy in her hand, like it was pulling her towards something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Chuck was waiting for her by the bar. He had 2 glasses in front of him, one half empty, the other untouched. He pushed the full one toward her as she approached. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer. She picked up the glass and took a sip. The liquor burned her throat, but she welcomed the distraction. "Who was that guy?" Chuck asked. "Somebody who wants me to record music." Chuck let out a low whistle. "No kidding." She set the glass down. "What does that even mean? Recording music?" He leaned against the bar, his broad shoulders hunched slightly, like he was carrying something heavy. "It means you go into a studio, play your songs, and they put it on records. People buy them. You get famous. Or at least, that's how it's supposed to work." She shook her head. "I don't know if I want to be famous." "You think anyone does?" Chuck said. "It's not about wanting it. It's about whether you can handle it." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time that night. His face was rough, lined with years of long nights and bad decisions. But his eyes were sharp, like he had seen more than he let on. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why did you make me play?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his glass and took a slow sip. "Because I've been in this business a long time, and I know when someone's got something special, even if they don't know it themselves." She wanted to believe him. But belief was a dangerous thing. It made you hope, and hope was even more dangerous. The walk home was quiet. The streets were empty, the night air cool against her skin. She kept her hands in her pockets, her fingers curled around the card like it was a secret. The city felt different now, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. Her apartment was small, just a single room with a bed in one corner and a hot plate in the other. The walls were thin, and she could hear her neighbor's radio playing softly through the plaster. She sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled off her shoes, letting them drop to the floor with a thud. The card was still in her hand. She turned it over again, running her fingers over the letters. Thompson Music Productions. It sounded important. It sounded like something that belonged to someone else. She thought about her grandmother. The old piano in the corner of their tiny house. The way her grandmother's hands would move over the keys like they were telling a story. She had loved those moments. Loved the way the music made the whole world feel smaller, like nothing else mattered. But her grandmother was gone now. And the piano had been sold years ago to pay for things that couldn't be paid for with music. She set the card down on the table beside her bed. Then she lay back, staring up at the ceiling. The paint was peeling in one corner, a slow, steady unraveling that had been happening for months. What if she called him? What if she didn't? What if she failed? What if she didn't? The next morning, the club was quiet. The lights were off, the chairs stacked on the tables, the floor sticky with last night's spills. She arrived early, before the cleaners, before the bartenders, before anyone else who might ask her questions she didn't have answers to. Chuck was already there, sitting at the bar with a cup of coffee that looked like it had been poured an hour ago. He didn't look up as she came in, but she knew he had heard her. "You sleep?" he asked. "Not really." He nodded, like that was the answer he had expected. "You gonna call him?" She didn't say anything. She walked over to the piano, ran her fingers over the keys. They were still warm from the lights, like they had been waiting for her. "What if I'm not good enough?" she asked quietly. Chuck let out a rough laugh. "Kid, you're the best thing that's walked into this place in years. Maybe ever." She turned to look at him. "Then why do I feel like I'm about to jump off a cliff?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked over to her, and leaned against the piano, his arms crossed. "Because you are. But the thing about cliffs is, sometimes you've got to jump to find out if you can fly." She looked down at her hands. They weren't trembling anymore. The phone was old, the kind that sat on a table and had a cord that always got tangled. She picked it up, dialed the number on the card with fingers that felt too thick, too clumsy. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice answered. "Thompson." She opened her mouth. Closed it, opened it again. "Hi," she said. "This is the girl from the club. The one who played the piano." There was a pause. Then Thompson's voice, smooth and sure. "I was hoping you'd call." She took a deep breath. "I want to talk about recording." She could almost hear the smile in his voice. "Tomorrow, my office. 10 a.m. She wrote the address down on a scrap of paper, her handwriting shaky. When she hung up, the room felt different. Like the walls had moved back, like there was more space than there had been before. Chuck was watching her from the bar. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She walked over to him, her steps lighter than they had been in years. "I'm doing it," she said. He nodded. "I know." And for the first time in a long time, she believed him. The address Thompson had given her led to a building that looked like it belonged in a different world. It was tall, sleek, with glass windows that reflected the sky like a mirror. She stood outside for a long time, just staring up at it, her hands clenched around the strap of her bag. The bag itself was old, the leather worn thin in places, the zipper sticking whenever she tried to open it too quickly. It was the same bag she had carried for years, through waitressing shifts, through rainy nights, through every small, forgotten dream she had ever had. She had worn her best dress, the one she saved for special occasions that never seemed to come. It was dark blue, simple, with a small tear near the hem that she had tried to sew up herself. Her shoes pinched her toes, but she told herself it didn't matter. Today wasn't about comfort. Today was about proving something, to Thompson, to Chuck, to herself. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The inside was even more intimidating than the outside. The floors were polished to a shine, the air smelled like expensive perfume, and the receptionist behind the desk looked like she had never once doubted herself in her life. The woman glanced up, her eyes flicking over the dress, the bag, the way she stood just a little too stiffly, like she was trying not to take up too much space. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her voice polite but distant. "I'm here to see Thompson," she said, her own voice sounding too small in the vast, echoing lobby. The receptionist didn't even ask her name. She just picked up the phone, murmured a few words, and then nodded toward a set of double doors. "Third floor. He's expecting you." The elevator ride was the longest 30 seconds of her life. She watched the numbers light up, one by one, her reflection staring back at her in the mirrored walls. She looked like a stranger, like someone who didn't belong. The third floor was quieter. The walls were lined with framed gold and platinum records, the kind she had only ever seen in magazines. Thompson's office was at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. She knocked, her knuckles rapping against the wood too lightly. "Come in." Thompson was sitting behind a massive desk, his suit even sharper than it had been the night before. He stood up as she entered, smiling like they were old friends. "You made it," she nodded, her fingers twisting around the strap of her bag. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs in front of his desk. "You want coffee? Water?" She shook her head. "I'm fine." He sat back down, folding his hands on the desk. "You ever been in a studio before?" "No." "Ever recorded anything?" No, he didn't seem surprised. He leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a puzzle he was trying to figure out. "You know, most people who walk in here have at least a demo, something to show me what they can do. But you?" He shook his head. "You just play and suddenly everyone in the room stops breathing." She didn't know what to say to that. So she said nothing. Thompson reached into a drawer and pulled out a contract. It was thick, the pages filled with tiny print that made her head spin just looking at it. He slid it across the desk toward her. "This is a standard deal. 3 albums. Touring, promotion. You'll be in the studio next week." She stared at the contract like it was a live grenade. "Next week?" "Time's money in this business," he said. "And you, my dear, are about to make a lot of it." She swallowed. "What if I'm not ready?" He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Nobody's ever ready." "Ready's a myth. You either jump or you don't." She thought about Chuck's words from the night before. "Sometimes you've got to jump to find out if you can fly." She wondered if he had known how terrifying the jump would be. The studio was nothing like she had imagined. She had pictured something grand, something that matched the polished halls of Thompson's office. But this was just a small room, the walls lined with soundproofing foam, the air thick with the hum of equipment. There was a piano in the corner, a microphone set up in the center, and a man in a hoodie sitting behind a mixing board, his fingers dancing over knobs and sliders. "This is Greg," Thompson said, nodding toward the man. "He's the best engineer in the city. If anyone can capture what you did the other night, it's him." Greg barely looked up. "Hey," Thompson clapped his hands together. "All right, let's hear it." She walked over to the piano, her steps slow, like she was moving through water. She sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys. The room was silent, so silent she could hear her own heartbeat. "Whenever you're ready," Greg said, his voice flat, like he had said the same words 1,000 times before. She closed her eyes. She thought about the club, about the way the music had filled the room, about the way it had felt to lose herself in it. She took a deep breath, and then she played. It wasn't perfect. Her fingers stumbled once, twice. The song wasn't the same as it had been that night. It couldn't be. That night had been magic, the kind of thing that couldn't be replicated. But this was something else. This was real. This was her, raw and unpolished, laying herself bare in a room full of strangers. When she finished, she opened her eyes. Greg was staring at her, his expression unreadable. Thompson was smiling, but it was a different kind of smile than before. This one was softer, almost proud. That, Greg said, was something else. Thompson nodded. "Told you." They recorded 3 songs that day. By the end of it, her fingers ached, her throat was dry, and her head was spinning. Greg played back the first track, the sound filling the room. It was strange hearing herself like that, like she was listening to someone else, someone who sounded sure, someone who knew what they were doing. "You've got a real gift," Greg said, finally looking up from his board. "Most people come in here and try to be something they're not. You just are." She didn't know how to respond to that. So she just nodded. Thompson slapped his hands on his thighs. All right, that's a wrap for today. We'll pick this up tomorrow. Same time. She stood up, her legs shaky. Tomorrow? You got somewhere else to be? She thought about the club, about Chuck, about the life she had been living just a few days ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. No, she said. I'll be here. The walk back to her apartment was a blur. The city moved around her, people rushing past, cars honking, the world going on like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She could feel it in the way her shoes hit the pavement, in the way the air tasted different. She was someone else now. Or at least, she was becoming someone else. Her apartment was just as she had left it. Small, quiet, the faint smell of coffee still lingering from that morning. She kicked off her shoes, letting them fall where they may, and collapsed onto the bed. Her hands were still trembling, but not from fear, from something else, from the weight of what she had done, of what she was about to do. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. There was a missed call from Chuck. She hesitated, then dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. Well? She smiled, even though he couldn't see it. I did it. There was a pause. Then his rough laugh. Knew you would. It was, she searched for the words. Terrible. Amazing. I don't know. That's how it's supposed to feel, he said. Like you're standing on the edge of something huge and you don't know if you're going to fall or fly. She closed her eyes. What if I fall? Then you get back up, he said simply. But I don't think you will. She wanted to believe him. More than anything, she wanted to believe him. That night she dreamed of the piano. Not the one in the studio, not the one in the club, but the old one in her grandmother's house. The one she had played as a child, the one that had been sold when times got hard. In the dream, she was small again, sitting on the bench, her feet dangling above the floor. Her grandmother was beside her, her hands guiding hers over the keys. Play from here, her grandmother whispered, pressing a hand to her chest, right over her heart. Always from here. She woke up with a start, her heart pounding. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows on the walls. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. The dream felt so real, like her grandmother had been there, like she had been trying to tell her something. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and walked over to the small table where she kept her things. The card Thompson had given her was still there, sitting beside her phone. She picked it up, turning it over in her fingers. On the back, in the empty space, she had written the time of her next session. She thought about the studio, about the contract, about the way it had felt to play in front of strangers. She thought about Chuck, about the club, about the life she was leaving behind. And for the first time, she let herself wonder about the life she was stepping into. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was hers. The jazz club was one of those places that smelled like old wood, cigarette smoke, and something sweet. Maybe the whiskey they served or the perfume of the women who came to forget their troubles for a night. The air was thick with the hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter that cut through the low murmur like a knife. The stage was small, just enough room for a piano, a microphone, and a stool that had seen better days. The walls were covered in faded posters of musicians nobody remembered anymore, their faces peeling at the edges, as if even the glue had given up on holding on to the past. Tonight, though, the stage was empty. The regular pianist, a man with fingers that danced over the keys like they were made for it, had called in sick. The manager, a broad-shouldered guy with a permanent scowl and a habit of cracking jokes nobody laughed at, stood near the bar, rubbing his temples. His name was Chuck, and he had a problem. The crowd was getting restless. People didn't come to this club to sit in silence. They came to feel something. Without music, the place was just another dimly lit room with too much alcohol and not enough magic. That's when he saw her. She was wiping down a table in the corner, her back turned to the stage, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun that looked like it had been tied up in a hurry. She moved with a quiet efficiency, the kind of person who did her job without drawing attention to herself. But Chuck had noticed something about her before, a habit she had when she thought nobody was watching. Her fingers would tap out rhythms on the tabletops, like she was playing an invisible piano. Sometimes, if the music was good, she'd close her eyes for just a second, lost in it. He walked over, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. She didn't look up until he cleared his throat. "You ever played the piano?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. She froze, her cloth hovering over a sticky ring on the table. For a second, she didn't answer. Then quietly, she shook her head. "Not really," Chuck smirked. He'd seen that look before, the look of someone who was lying, but not because they wanted to deceive you. Because they were afraid of being seen, afraid of failing, or maybe, just maybe, afraid of succeeding. "Come on," he said, jerking his thumb toward the stage. "If you play the piano, I'll stop bugging you for a month." She hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the stage, then back to him. The crowd was getting louder, their impatience growing. Someone shouted for music. Another person clinked their glass against a bottle. The tension in the room was like a stretched rubber band ready to snap. "Fine," she muttered, more to herself than to him. She set the cloth down on the table, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked toward the piano. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It happened in waves. First, the people closest to the stage noticed her sitting down, her fingers hovering over the keys. Then the ones in the middle. Finally, the ones in the back, who had been too busy talking to pay attention, realized something was happening. A hush fell over the club, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like everyone is holding their breath. She took a deep breath. Her hands trembled just slightly, but she pressed her fingers to the keys, and then she played. It wasn't just notes. It wasn't just a song. It was like she reached inside the piano and pulled out something alive, something that had been waiting to be set free. The music filled the room, rich and deep and full of a sadness that made your chest ache. It was jazz, but it wasn't just jazz. It was blues, it was classical, it was something entirely her own. Her fingers moved with a confidence that didn't match the way she carried herself, like she had been playing her whole life. The crowd didn't move. They didn't clap, they didn't cheer. They just listened, their eyes wide, their drinks forgotten. Even Chuck, who had been ready to laugh if she hit a wrong note, stood frozen, his smirk gone. She finished the song, her hands lingering on the keys for a moment before she pulled them away. The silence lasted another second. Then someone started clapping. Slow at first, then faster, louder. Soon, the whole room was on their feet, cheering, whistling, shouting for more. She stood up from the piano, her face flushed, her eyes bright. She didn't look at Chuck. She didn't look at the crowd. She just walked back to her table, picked up her cloth, and started wiping it down again like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Chuck was still staring at the stage when a man in a sharp suit approached him. The man had been sitting at the bar the whole time, nursing a drink, watching. He had the kind of face that looked like it belonged in boardrooms, not jazz clubs. "Who was that?" the man asked, his voice smooth, his eyes sharp. Chuck swallowed. "That," he said, "is my waitress." The man raised an eyebrow. "She's more than that." Chuck didn't answer. He was too busy watching the girl, no, the woman, who had just turned his world upside down with a single song. He had joked with her, thinking she was just another dreamer who would never amount to anything. But now he realized something terrifying. She wasn't just good. She was extraordinary, and he had no idea what to do with that. The recording sessions blurred together. Days turned into nights, and nights turned into more days, all of them filled with the hum of the studio, the click of the metronome, and the endless pursuit of perfection. She lost track of time. The world outside the studio doors felt distant, like a dream she had once had but couldn't quite remember. The first time she heard her song on the radio, she was sitting in a diner, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The song started softly, just the piano and then her voice, hesitant at first, but growing stronger with each note. She froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth, her breath caught in her throat. The waitress behind the counter glanced over, smiling like she recognized the song. "That's you, isn't it?" the waitress asked. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She just sat there, listening, as the song filled the diner, as the other patrons stopped their conversations to listen too. It was surreal, hearing herself like that. Like she was outside of her own body, watching someone else's life unfold. When the song ended, the waitress clapped. "You're gonna be big," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She didn't feel big. She felt small. Smaller than she ever had before. The album dropped on a Tuesday. She remembered that because Thompson had insisted it was the best day for sales, like the day of the week could somehow determine the fate of her career. She spent the morning pacing her apartment, her phone silent in her hand. She had expected something, calls, messages, some sign that the world had noticed. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the city outside her window, the occasional honk of a car horn, the distant laughter of children playing in the street. She was about to turn off her phone when it buzzed in her hand. It was a text from Chuck. "Turn on the TV." She grabbed the remote, flipping through channels until she found it. There she was, on the local news, a clip of her playing in the studio, her face serious, her fingers moving over the keys. The reporter was talking about her album, about how it was climbing the charts faster than anyone had expected, about how she was being called the next big thing. She set the remote down, her hands shaking. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Thompson. "We're going on tour." The tour was a whirlwind. Cities blurred together: New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, each one bigger and louder than the last. The venues got larger, the crowds more enthusiastic, the expectations heavier. She played night after night, her fingers aching, her voice growing hoarse, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. There was something addictive about it, about the way the crowd would go silent the moment she sat down at the piano, about the way they would erupt into applause when she finished. But it wasn't just the crowds. It was the people. Backstage, the ones who treated her like she was already a legend. The reporters who asked her the same questions over and over again. The fans who waited outside her hotel, their eyes wide with admiration, like she was someone worth admiring. It was overwhelming. It was exhilarating. It was terrifying. One night, after a show in Atlanta, she found herself sitting alone in her dressing room, her makeup still on, her dress still sparkly under the harsh fluorescent lights. She was staring at her hands, at the way they trembled slightly, like they didn't belong to her anymore. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," she said, her voice tired. The door opened, and Chuck walked in. He looked out of place in his old leather jacket, his scuffed boots, his face rough with stubble. He didn't belong here, in this world of glitter and fame. But then again, neither did she. "You were amazing out there," he said, leaning against the door frame like he was afraid to come any closer. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks." He studied her for a long moment. "You okay?" She wanted to say yes. She wanted to tell him that this was everything she had ever dreamed of, that she was living the life she had always wanted. But the words stuck in her throat. "I don't know," she admitted. Chuck walked over, pulling up a chair beside her. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, his presence solid, real, in a world that had started to feel like it was made of smoke and mirrors. "It's a lot," she said finally. "More than I thought it would be." He nodded. "Fame's a funny thing. It gives you everything you ever wanted, and then it takes a little piece of you in return." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in what felt like years. He was the same as he had always been, rough around the edges but steady, dependable. "What if I can't do it?" she asked quietly. "What if I'm not good enough?" Chuck reached out, squeezing her shoulder. "You're already doing it, and you're more than good enough. You always were." She closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing. It was Thompson, his voice sharp and eager on the other end of the line. "We've got a problem," he said. Her stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "Your album's selling out everywhere. The label wants to double the tour dates. We're talking Europe, Asia, the works." She sat up, rubbing her eyes. That's a good thing, right? It's a great thing, Thompson said. But it means more work, more pressure. You ready for that? She thought about the night before, about Chuck's words, about the way the crowd had looked at her like she was something special. She thought about the little girl who had sat at her grandmother's piano, dreaming of a life like this. Yeah, she said, I'm ready. The next few months were a blur of airports and hotel rooms, of sound checks and interviews, of faces and names she would never remember. She played in grand concert halls, in tiny clubs, in stadiums so large she couldn't see the faces in the back. She signed autographs, posed for photos, smiled until her cheeks hurt. She was living the dream. But dreams, she was starting to learn, weren't always what they seemed. One night, after a show in Paris, she found herself standing on the balcony of her hotel room, looking out over the city. The lights twinkled like stars, the Eiffel Tower glowing in the distance. It was beautiful. It was everything she had ever wanted. So why did she feel so empty? She heard the door open behind her, but she didn't turn around. She knew who it was. You're missing the after-party, Thompson said, walking up beside her. He was holding a glass of champagne, the bubbles fizzing softly in the night air. I needed a break, she said. He didn't push. He just stood there beside her, looking out over the city. You know, you've got the world at your feet right now, everything you ever wanted. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. What if it's not what I want anymore? Thompson didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. Then you figure out what you do want, and you go after that. She looked at him surprised. He had always been so sure, so confident in the path he had laid out for her. She had expected him to argue, to tell her she was being ridiculous. But he just smiled, a small, understanding smile. You're not just some artist I picked up in a club, you know. You're more than that. And if this isn't what you want, then we'll find something that is. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, her throat tight. Thompson clinked his glass against hers. To figuring it out, he said. She took a sip, the champagne bubbling on her tongue. It tasted like possibility. The next day, she called Chuck. She hadn't talked to him in weeks, not since that night in Atlanta, and she realized suddenly how much she had missed him. Hey, he said, his voice warm, familiar. How's the big-time life treating you? She laughed, but it came out shaky. It's a lot. Yeah, he said. I bet. She hesitated. I think I need to come home for a while. There was a pause, then softly, You know you always have a place here? She closed her eyes, relief washing over her. Thanks. Just don't forget about us little people when you're off winning Grammys, he said, but she could hear the smile in his voice. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. I won't. The flight home was the first time in months she had been truly alone. No managers, no assistants, no fans. Just her, a window seat, and the endless sky stretching out before her. She thought about the tour, about the crowds, about the way it had felt to stand on that stage night after night. She thought about Thompson, about Chuck, about the life she had left behind and the life she was building. She thought about her grandmother, about the piano, about the little girl who had dreamed of this moment. And for the first time, she let herself wonder what came next. She had spent so long chasing this dream, this idea of what success was supposed to look like. But now that she had it, she realized something. Success wasn't a destination. It was a journey, and she was just at the beginning. The plane touched down, the wheels screeching against the runway. She took a deep breath, her hands steady, her heart full. She was home. And for the first time in a long time, she knew exactly where she belonged. The club hadn't changed. The same dim lights, the same sticky floors, the same faint smell of whiskey and old wood. It was smaller than she remembered, or maybe she had just grown used to bigger stages, brighter lights. but the moment she stepped inside, it felt like coming home. Chuck was behind the bar, polishing a glass with a rag that had seen better days. He looked up as she walked in, and for a second, neither of them said anything. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. "Look what the cat dragged in," he said, setting the glass down. She smiled, walking over to the bar. "Miss me?" "Like a toothache," he said, but his eyes were warm. "What brings you back to this dump?" She slid onto a stool, her fingers tracing the worn wood of the bar. "Needed to remember where I came from." Chuck nodded like he understood. He poured her a drink, whiskey, neat, and pushed it across the bar. "You've been busy." She took a sip, the liquor burning her throat in a familiar way. "Yeah, heard your album's topping the charts." She shrugged. "Something like that?" He studied her for a long moment. "You don't seem happy about it." She looked down at her drink, swirling the amber liquid in the glass. "It's not that I'm not happy. It's just different than I thought it would be." Chuck leaned against the bar, his arms crossed. "Fame's a funny thing. You spend your whole life chasing it. And then when you get it, you realize it's not what you really wanted." She looked up at him, surprised. "You sound like you know from experience." He laughed, a rough, bitter sound. "I had my moment in the sun once. Long time ago. Didn't end well." She had never asked him about his past. She had always just assumed he had always been here, behind this bar, in this club. But now she found herself curious. "What happened?" Chuck was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I was a musician back in the day. Played guitar. Had a band. We were good, really good. Got signed, went on tour, the whole 9 yards. He paused, his eyes distant. "But the road changes you. The fame, the money, the people telling you you're the next big thing. You start believing it. And then one day you wake up and realize you don't even recognize yourself anymore." She didn't say anything. She just listened. "We were playing a show in Vegas," he continued. "Big venue, sold out. And I just snapped. Walked off stage mid-set. Never went back." He shook his head. "Lost the band, lost the deal, lost everything. Ended up here." She didn't know what to say, so she just reached out, squeezing his arm. "I'm sorry," he shrugged like it didn't matter. But she could see the weight of it in his eyes. "It's just how it goes sometimes. You chase the dream, and the dream changes you. Or maybe it just shows you who you really are." She thought about that for a long moment, about the tour, the crowds, the endless cycle of performances and interviews, about the way she had started to feel like she was losing herself in it all. "What do you do?" she asked quietly. "When you realize the dream isn't what you thought it was." Chuck looked at her, his expression soft. "You find a new one." The club was quiet that night. Just a handful of regulars, the kind of people who came for the music, not the spectacle. She sat at the piano, her fingers moving over the keys like they were old friends. She didn't play anything fancy, just simple, honest music, the kind she had played that first night, the kind that had started it all. Chuck was watching her from the bar, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. She could feel his eyes on her, but she didn't look up. She just played, losing herself in the music, in the way it filled the room, the way it made everything else fade away. When she finished, the small crowd clapped, their applause warm and genuine. She stood up, bowing slightly, and then walked over to the bar. Chuck slid another drink toward her. "You still got it," she laughed, taking a sip. "Never lost it." He studied her for a long moment. "You thinking about quitting?" She didn't answer right away. She thought about the tour, about the crowds, about the way it had felt to stand on that stage, night after night. She thought about Thompson, about the album, about the life she had built. And then she thought about this place, about the way it had always felt like home. "I don't know," she said finally. "I just know I need a break. Need to figure out what I really want." Chuck nodded like he had expected that answer. "You'll figure it out." She hoped he was right. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing. "It was Thompson. Where are you?" he asked, his voice sharp. "You're supposed to be in New York for the awards show tonight." She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "I'm not coming." There was a pause. "Then what?" "I'm not coming," she repeated, her voice steady. "I need a break, Thompson. I can't keep doing this. You can't just bail on the awards show, he said, his voice rising. This is your moment. Your album's up for 3 awards. You're the talk of the town. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. I know, and I'm grateful. But I can't do it. Not right now. Thompson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. You're serious? Yeah, she said. I'm serious, he sighed. All right, I'll handle it. But you need to think about what you're doing. This isn't just about you anymore. You've got a career, a label, fans who are counting on you. She knew he was right. But she also knew she couldn't keep going like this, not if she wanted to stay true to herself. I'll think about it, she said. I promise. Thompson didn't say anything else. He just hung up, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She spent the next few days wandering the city, revisiting the places she had loved before everything had changed. The diner where she had first heard her song on the radio, the park where she had sat for hours, dreaming of a life beyond the one she had, the small music shop where she had once window shopped, pressing her hands against the glass, wishing she could afford the pianos inside. She thought about her grandmother, about the way she had taught her to play, about the way she had always believed in her, even when no one else did. She thought about Chuck, about the club, about the way it had felt to play for people who weren't there to see a star, but to hear music. And slowly, she started to realize something. She didn't want to quit. She just wanted to do it on her own terms. She found Chuck at the club again, sitting at the bar, his head in his hands. He looked up as she walked in, his expression tired. You okay? She asked. He shrugged. Just another night. She sat down beside him. I've been thinking? Dangerous habit, he said, but there was a smile in his voice. She ignored him. I don't want to quit. I just want to do things differently. No more tours, no more endless promotions. Just the music. Chuck looked at her, his expression serious. You think that's possible? She didn't know, but she wanted to try. I think it has to be. He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then you do it. You play the music you want to play the way you want to play it. And if the world doesn't like it, well, that's their problem. She smiled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. Thanks. Don't thank me, he said, standing up. Just don't forget where you came from. She watched him walk away, then turned back to the piano. Her fingers itched to play, to create something new, something that was truly hers. The next time she walked into the studio, it was different. There were no cameras, no reporters, no expectations. Just her, the piano, and the music. Thompson was there, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed. He didn't say anything as she sat down as she began to play. The song was different than anything she had recorded before. Softer, more honest. It was the sound of someone who had been lost and had finally found her way home. When she finished, Thompson was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked over, sitting down beside her. That was beautiful, he said. She smiled. It's me, he nodded. It's you. She took a deep breath, her hands steady, her heart full. I'm ready. Thompson stood up, clapping her on the shoulder. Then let's make an album. The album wasn't a hit. Not like the first one. It didn't top the charts, didn't win awards, didn't make her a household name. But it didn't matter. Because for the first time, she was playing the music she wanted to play. And the people who listened, they understood. They wrote to her, telling her how her songs had touched them, how they had made them feel seen, how they had given them hope. She still played the club sometimes, on nights when she missed the intimacy of it, when she needed to remember why she had started in the first place. Chuck would always be there, watching from the bar, his expression proud. One night, after a particularly moving set, a young girl approached her. She was shy, her eyes wide, her hands clutching a worn notebook. You're amazing, the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to play like you someday. She smiled, remembering what it had felt like to be that young, to have a dream so big it scared you. You will, she said. Just keep playing, and always play from here. She pressed a hand to her chest, right over her heart. The girl's eyes lit up. Thank you. She watched the girl walk away, then turned back to the piano. Chuck was watching her, his expression soft. You're good at that, he said. She laughed.
At what?
At being you, she smiled, her fingers moving over the keys. Took me a while to figure out how. Chuck didn't say anything else. He just sat there, listening, as she played one last song for the night.